Thanksgiving at our house had always been a little chaotic, but full of tradition. The smell of turkey roasting, the buttery mashed potatoes, the clinking of plates, and the sound of laughter from the living room usually filled the house with warmth. But this year was different. There was a certain tension in the air, like something unspoken was sitting in the center of the room, waiting for its cue. Mom had been fluttering around the kitchen since morning, clearly nervous and unusually focused. On appearances, I arrived right on time with a store-bought pie, something she used to hate but accepted with a tight-lipped smile this year. Everyone else was already there, my brother with his wife, their perfect golden retriever lounging on the couch, and my aunt already 2 glasses into the wine. The moment I walked in, I knew something was off. My mom practically leapt across the room to greet me, and before I could even take off my coat, she launched into it. "Did you hear? Your brother just bought a gorgeous home in the suburbs. 4 bedrooms, a pool, and a wine cellar. We're so proud." Her voice rose like she was announcing a royal wedding. The room paused as if awaiting my reaction. I gave a polite nod, managing a half smile. "That's nice," I said, trying to sound supportive, but something inside me shifted. This wasn't the first time she had done this, used family gatherings to parade my brother's accomplishments, like trophies while brushing past anything I'd done. The mood continued light, but I could feel the sharp edge under every word. My brother's wife chimed in with a dramatic retelling of how hard it was to choose between marble countertops and quartz. Everyone laughed. I sat there, watching this performance, feeling like a background character in my own family. It wasn't the house that stung, it was how invisible I'd become over the years. At one point, Mom turned to me and asked what was new with my life, but it felt like an obligation, not curiosity. Before I could speak, she was back to detailing. The heated flooring in the new master bathroom. The turkey was carved, plates were passed, but the air around me felt cold. Every word, every glance reminded me that I was the other sibling, the one who didn't live in the suburbs, didn't own a golden retriever, and didn't have a glamorous life to display. And yet, none of them knew the truth. They didn't know what I had built quietly, far from their eyes and their approval. They didn't know that my silence wasn't failure, it was restraint as dinner continued. I sat in silence, chewing each bite of food like it was part of a routine. My brother had taken center stage again, telling a long-winded story about how the realtor had fought to get him an early showing before anyone else saw the property. My mom's eyes sparkled with admiration, and she gasped at all the right places. It was like watching a live play, and I wasn't even in the script. My aunt leaned over at one point and whispered, "You thinking of buying soon?" I nodded noncommittally, choosing not to explain that I already had property, just not the kind this family would applaud. I lived in the city, had invested in several multi-unit buildings, and ran a quietly successful company that paid me well beyond what my brother earned. But none of it ever seemed enough because it didn't fit their polished mold. I could have spoken up, could have listed out my accomplishments, but I knew it wouldn't matter. They weren't listening for success, they were listening for validation of their vision, the vision where my brother wore the crown. He fit perfectly. The polished suit, the charming smile, the good credit score. Meanwhile, I had taken risks, built something from scratch, failed, succeeded, failed again, and eventually made it on my own terms. But because I didn't post it all on Facebook or invite Mom over for wine cellar tours, it didn't exist in their eyes. I glanced at my brother during a lull in conversation. He caught my eye and smiled. Not mockingly, just neutrally. But it made me realize he had no idea either. No one had ever asked. No one had bothered. They didn't know how many nights I'd stayed awake running spreadsheets, how many calls I'd made to get funding, how much sacrifice it took to walk away from the expected path and still survive. Then Mom clinked her glass and stood up. "I just want to take a moment," she said, holding up her wine glass, "to say how proud we are of Daniel and his beautiful new home. It's so inspiring to see him succeed, and we can't wait to visit." Everyone clapped. I raised my glass politely, but my face was frozen. It wasn't envy, it was exhaustion. I had spent so long trying to earn that same applause, only to realize that it was never meant for me. I wasn't the type of success they recognized. And that's when I decided to say just one sentence, not out of anger, but out of clarity. I waited for the noise to die down, and then I looked directly at my mom. "I actually just bought a building downtown, 4 units, full occupancy, and cash flow positive," I said. Just that, one sentence. But it landed like thunder in that quiet moment after the toast. For a second, no one spoke. My mom blinked, her glass halfway to her lips. My brother turned his head slowly, confusion flickering across his face. My aunt coughed. The silence wasn't dramatic like in movies, it was worse. It was the kind of silence that exposed the cracks in people's assumptions. "Oh," Mom finally said. "That's nice, dear." She said it like I had just mentioned buying a new pair of shoes. But the sentence had done its work. My brother asked, "Wait, you bought a building?" I nodded. "Yeah, I own it. Just closed last month. Rented out all the units already." "It's been in the works for a while." His wife raised an eyebrow. "Isn't that a lot of work?" She asked. "It is," I replied. "But I've been doing this for a while now. This is actually my third property. I manage them myself, but I also have a team now." I didn't need to elaborate. I could see the confusion turning into recalibration. I wasn't the struggling sibling anymore. I wasn't the one who needed advice or applause. I was just someone they hadn't understood, someone who had succeeded in a different language. The room shifted subtly. My aunt asked a few follow-up questions. My brother even looked curious. But Mom, she was quiet, not cold, but stunned. I could tell she didn't know what to do with this information. It didn't fit the story she'd been telling herself and others for years. It was easier when I was the underdog, the one who hadn't settled down or bought a house with a white picket fence. The sentence had rewritten the narrative, and now she didn't know where to place me. Thanksgiving carried on after that, but it wasn't the same. People looked at me differently. They asked about my work, my plans, even offered compliments that felt real. But the most important shift wasn't external, it was inside me. For years, I had carried around the need to be seen by them, to be validated by a family that only valued what was loud, visible, and traditional. I had hoped that someday they'd see the worth in what I was doing, that they'd recognize the independence, the creativity, the quiet victories. But I realized something after that sentence. I didn't need their approval. I never did. What I needed was to stop shrinking to fit inside their version of success. I didn't own a suburban house, but I provided homes for people. I didn't host holiday parties in a remodeled kitchen, but I had created spaces where tenants built their lives. My life didn't come with Instagram filters and wine cellars, but it was real and earned. That one sentence wasn't for them. It was for me. It was proof that I was done hiding. My mom, to her credit, did try later that night. After dessert, as everyone lounged around the fireplace, she came and sat beside me. "You never told me about the buildings," she said quietly. I shrugged. "I guess I figured you wouldn't be interested." She frowned. "That's not true." I smiled gently. "It kind of is. You like houses and wedding pictures and job titles. What I have doesn't really fit into that box." She looked away, and I thought that was the end of it. But then she said, "Maybe I've been wrong about what matters." That sentence, so simple, so unexpected, meant more to me than any toast ever could. It wasn't a full apology, but it was a start. We sat there for a while in silence, the kind that wasn't sharp but soft, a new kind of silence, one that allowed space for change. In the days after Thanksgiving, I kept replaying the moment in my mind, not because I regretted it, but because of what it revealed. I had spent so many years lowering my voice at the dinner table, keeping my achievements compact and unimposing, just to avoid stealing the spotlight or making anyone uncomfortable. I had convinced myself that silence was humility, that invisibility was noble. But what I realized at that table was something deeper, that by hiding who I wasn't protecting anyone. I was only diminishing myself, and my family wasn't entirely to blame either. They couldn't value what they didn't understand. They celebrated what was familiar to them, what made sense in the framework they were handed. It took me a long time to see that love can exist alongside ignorance, and that recognition sometimes needs to be taught. After that dinner, I received a text from my brother that surprised me. "Hey, didn't know you were doing all that." That's impressive, man. Simple, but honest. For the first time in a long while, I felt like he saw me as an equal mod. The artsy sibling, not the reckless risk taker, but someone who had built something worth respecting. We ended up meeting for coffee the following week, and the conversation that unfolded between us felt new, unfiltered, like we were finally having an adult conversation not shaped by roles assigned in childhood. He asked questions, genuine ones, about how I got into real estate, what kind of returns I was seeing, how I handled difficult tenants. I answered openly, and it felt good. Not like bragging, but sharing. He told me he always thought I was doing something creative, but didn't realize it was also financially successful. I laughed and told him that most of my creativity was in how I managed to stay solvent in bad markets. We joked about mistakes and missteps, and for the first time, I felt like my brother wasn't just the favorite son, he was a person like me, with insecurities and pride and the need to be seen. Our relationship began to shift after that. We didn't suddenly become best friends, but we became honest with each other, and that was more valuable than anything. Sometimes I wonder how different things might have been if I had spoken up earlier, if I had refused to play the role of the quiet one, the one who lets others shine. But then I remind myself that timing matters, and growth isn't just about being seen, it's about seeing yourself clearly enough to stop waiting for someone else to tell you your worth. Mom eventually came around too, in her own way. She didn't throw a party for my investment properties or start bragging to the neighbors, but she began asking different questions. "How's the new building going?" Or, "Do you need help furnishing any of the units?" Small things, but sincere. She even told a friend at church about my son who runs his own real estate business downtown. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. I think she realized that success doesn't always come in the form of granite countertops and suburban zip codes. Sometimes it comes in spreadsheets, stubborn tenants, and late-night calls from plumbers. And maybe, just maybe, that's worth being proud of too. I noticed something else as well. My relationship with myself began to shift. Once I stopped chasing their validation, I found a strange sense of peace. I began to celebrate my wins privately, but proudly. I started mentoring younger entrepreneurs, not because it made me look good, but because I remembered how lonely it felt to start without guidance. I gave talks at local events, shared my story on podcasts, and for the first time, used my full name without hesitation. I stopped editing myself down to be digestible for others. And that confidence bled into every area of my life. Friends noticed it, even my posture changed. The more I owned my path, the less I needed applause. That Thanksgiving wasn't just a turning point with my family, it was a turning point with myself. I used to believe that staying quiet kept the peace, But now I know that peace built on silence is just delay. Real peace comes from being known, from being real, even if it makes the room uncomfortable. That one sentence at dinner was uncomfortable, yes, but it also cracked something open. It created room for a new version of us, a version where both brothers could be successful in different ways, where mom could learn to clap for things she didn't understand, where I didn't have to fold myself to fit at the table, and where silence could finally be replaced with truth. Months later, as spring rolled in and the trees downtown began to bloom, I hosted a small gathering at one of my properties. It wasn't extravagant, just a rooftop BBQ with close friends, a few tenants, and surprisingly, my brother and mom. She looked around the building with genuine curiosity, asking questions about the layout and rent prices, commenting on the hardwood floors like a realtor. I watched her face as she took it all in, and for once, she wasn't comparing it to someone else's home she was present. My brother stood beside me on the roof, beer in hand, looking out over the city. You... No, he said. I think Mom's finally starting to get it. I smiled. Took long enough. We both laughed. But it's kind of cool, he continued. Seeing where you live, what you do. You've got something good here. That meant more than I could say. Not because I needed his approval, but because he was choosing to understand me on my terms. Later that evening, Mom pulled me aside. I'm proud of you, she said. Not just for this place, but for building a life that makes you happy. I nodded. Thanks, Mom. We didn't need a long speech. Just that. Sometimes love sounds like a toast, sometimes like a whisper, and sometimes the words unsaid carry just as much weight. I looked around at the life I had built, not perfect, not flashy, but solid and real, and realized I wouldn't trade it for anything. The silence at Thanksgiving had been broken, but what replaced it wasn't noise, it was recognition. And that's all I had ever wanted, not applause. Just to be seen Dot as the night wound down and the rooftop lights twinkled against the city skyline. I stood alone for a moment, taking it all in. The journey from that Thanksgiving table to this rooftop gathering wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about finally giving myself permission to be exactly who I was out loud. I thought back to that one sentence, so simple, yet so powerful. It wasn't a declaration of war. It was a quiet unveiling of the truth. And the silence it created wasn't rejection, it was recalibration. It forced everyone to look again, including me. I had spent too long waiting for someone else to speak, up for me to validate my path. But in the end, it had to be me. And once I did, everything changed, not because the world suddenly applauded, but because I finally did. And now, every Thanksgiving that comes after won't be about competition or comparison. It'll be about a table where everyone has a seat, where stories are shared, and where success wears many faces. I'll bring my pie, I'll carve the turkey, and if the topic comes up again about homes and success and pride, I'll smile and speak my truth. Not to silence the room, but to fill it with something real.